I want my kid to miss the sport. Like, if you never miss it, that's a problem. Well, how are you going to miss a sport if you're training 11 to 12 months a year round? You never miss it. And so, part of growing a love for the game, I think, is actually, or learning if you love it, is, do you miss it when it's not there? What's the message they're getting from their parents, for instance, when you're trying to develop the social, mental side of an athlete, and the message at home could be drastically different. It could be, you need to dominate, you need to score, you need to do this, while the coach is preaching teamwork. And imagine a 10-year-old having those two adults in their life, basically authority figures, pulling in different directions. What I am against is, you have some clubs, medium-sized, big clubs, you have 300 kids in the age group, and you select 10 8-year-olds, and you're trying to play them up a year, or all the resources go into that one group of 10, and they're doing travel tournaments, and the parents are paying all kinds of money, and they've hired a paid coach. Like, we have no idea what that group of 10 is going to look like at 12 years old. And now, to fix this, some of them have dropped off, or someone's better. We got to go cut one of them, or 3 of them. What does that do? You were anointed as the special one at 8 years old.
Over the past few years, Steve Kindel has seen a trio of players from his program develop into 3 of the top young talents in the NHL. The interesting wrinkle here, Steve oversees a soccer club, not a hockey program. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, the host of Better Sports Parents, a podcast designed to help you, me, and anyone else out there become exactly that, a better sports parent. We do that through conversations with world-class performers from across the sports spectrum, people who have experienced sport at every level and want to improve the youth sports environment by sharing their insight and perspective. Steve Kindel is a former soccer player who not only played with 5 different teams professionally, but also donned the Canadian jersey as a member of the men's national team. Like many ex-pros, he then moved into coaching and is currently the senior technical director with North Van FC. His wife, Sara Maglio, followed a similar path, playing for Canada in the 1999 World Cup, in addition to her own pro career. It's not terribly surprising to learn that they have 2 very athletic children, Lacey, who is currently a part of Canada's U17 soccer program, and Ben, who is a rookie with the Pittsburgh Penguins after being drafted 11th overall this past June. Now, Ben, like Connor Bedard and Macklin Celebrini before him, played soccer for his dad's club in North Vancouver. So Steve has been in a unique position to watch their respective development pathways, in addition to thousands of other players who have been a part of that club. He's played the role of coach, parent, and parent-coach over the years, and he's here to share that experience with all of us on Better Sports Parents. First of all, Steve, thank you very much for doing this and taking the time to talk with us here on Better Sports Parents.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And I've had the pleasure of listening to some of your other shows, and obviously some very accomplished people, soccer related, some other sports like hockey. And I think it's a phenomenal project that you have going on here to have stories shared about how, some, players or kids have been brought up by families and different perspectives. I'm sure every family has their own values and things that they focus on are important to them. And hearing some of the stories from some of the parents and families you've had on has been very interesting.
Well, I'm really glad to hear this, and I think yours will be a story that people find very compelling as well. You talk about the parents and the kids. I want to get this off the table right now because your wife played professionally. She played for Canada as well in a Women's World Cup. Your son is now in the National Hockey League as an 18-year-old, and your daughter is playing for Canada at the U17 level. Who is the best athlete in the household, Steve?
I don't know. Sarah would claim it's her for sure. Um, in her own right she was a fast player. She was strong on the ball. Like she had, strength and I'd give her that, to be honest. If you ask my teammates or growing up and, in college, I scored a lot of goals. I played an attacking position, but near the end of my career when I had the most success, and when I mean by success, I mean, like team championships. We won 2 out of 3 USL titles and at the back end of my career. And I was playing left back. I wasn't playing in a glorious attacking position. I had to make adjustments as I went. And because there was better, younger, faster, more athletic players that were coming into the Whitecaps. And if I didn't make those adjustments, I probably wouldn't have had as long as a career, but I was happy to because I ended up being on a winning team 2 out of the last 3, and, I maybe survived more with my compete level, willingness to do maybe what some other players weren't willing to do, and maybe my game smarts than athleticism. So, if I'm gonna claim those strengths, I have to concede that then, maybe the athleticism is from Sarah.
Well, when you talk about your compete level, I know it's impossible for you to say from an age where you might not have a memory, and maybe asking your parents would be a better way to go. But for as long as you can remember, was that there? Were you a very driven player, regardless of sport, at a very young age?
Yeah, I mean, hard to remember too far back, but I do think, around sort of 13, 14, back then the Whitecaps or 86ers at the time, they didn't have like a youth academy. And so the main development for players outside of the club system, Canada Soccer had regional centers. And so the way the system was back then, which is a bit different than the Whitecaps youth team program now, you stayed with your club and you played club soccer, even if you were identified by Canada Soccer. So we train at SFU 4 days a week opposite our club training and games. And it was multi-age group. It was maybe 30 guys between 14 to 18, mixed groups. And, I got to train with guys like, a Nico Berg or Chris Franks that were a few years older than me. And then there was my generation that had like sort of Jeff Clark and Alfredo Valente came up behind us. We're all just mixed together. And our two coaches there, Bruce Twomley and Chris Bennett, they were pretty hard on us, hard but fair. When we talk about old school, they just fostered such a competitive environment. Like every drill was contested for, every scrimmage ended in a fight over the score. They had to replace the pennies every 3 weeks because they were getting ripped. And, basically it was, unless you punched someone in the head or really elbowed somebody, there was no rules. And they knew what they were preparing us for. Like in terms of national team level, you're going into CONCACAF, you're going down into Central America to play qualifying games in U17, U20, what have you. Guys will recall like Niall Thompson having to go up to SFU and train against him and him being 3 years older. If he had to bite you to win a scrimmage, he would do it. you know, and he's one of, a good friend of mine. We still keep in touch, but so he would take that as a compliment. But that was sort of where I established that competitiveness, and it was a titch scary at first, but Chris and Bruce just had this great ability to draw that out of us, and it wasn't for everyone. We had players that stopped coming. It was too much, or they weren't fitting in, and they just went back to their club. But the ones who could survive the first year or so, it was just a great breeding ground for sort of our generation of player at that time.
It's really interesting when you talk about the competitive environment and that drawing the compete out of you and that drive out of you. I know it's impossible to say, but it's always a debate around youth sports and professional sports as well. Do you think that's an innate quality? Is that something that you're born with? Or do you believe that it can be coached and taught?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a licensed psychologist, so I don't know. Maybe the answer lies in between somewhere, but obviously, yeah, not everyone's wired that way. So I do think there is something that's just in your DNA, but I do think it can it can be developed as well, depending on the culture and the environment. So probably a bit of both. And, everyone has their limit. It's like, can you teach someone to jump higher? Yeah, you can. But at the end of the day, and look at me, I'm only going to jump so high because I was born the way I was. So probably a bit of both.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we talk about that from a development standpoint as well, because you're talking about the age where that compete and drive really came out of you. And with other kids, we see it earlier. It, to me, is a really important note on the development process because we really don't know when a youth is going to become engaged in a particular sport, do we?
No, and that's, one of the most difficult, and the most challenging things about coaching is making sure that, it's age appropriate, number one, how much you can push and poke and prod and demand of a teenager versus a 10-year-old, and then level appropriate too, again. And so we have a huge range of kids coming through the program. Some are early starters, some are late bloomers, some, come from an athletic family. Some have older siblings, which makes a huge difference, on a kid's first steps onto a soccer field at 4 years old. Could be a big difference between someone with an older sibling that's kind of played in the backyard for 2 years already versus someone who's the first child. So these coaches, especially in the volunteer world that I work in, they don't know where all these kids are coming from, their backgrounds. They have a range and ability that they have to deal with. And the best coaches, they can learn and figure out what players can handle what and push just the right amount. And, some kids need the arm around the shoulder. Some kids thrive with, a bit of a bark and some kids will go into a shell. And I'm sure it's the same for teachers. They have a classroom full of kids and some need extra help and some need a more challenging project and will go home and love that. And where another kid will go, man, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. So I think that's one of the most difficult parts of coaching. But one thing the most skillful coaches have is that ability to, treat everyone fair, but you can't treat everyone the same.
I agree with that point, and really at the heart of that is finding a way to connect with your pupils, to connect with the children that you are coaching and figure out what makes each one of them tick, how they're motivated. And I understand volunteers don't always have that time, but I do see in the world of youth sports right now that whether it's volunteer coaches or paid coaches, a lot of them are so focused on the technical component and teaching the game that often what gets neglected is that relationship component, which to me is so important because we find out the why behind children being there. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. I mean, again, if you look at player development and what goes into it and like there's everyone talks about the four pillars like of a player, the tactical development, like strategy, game understanding, the technical, dribbling, passing, shooting, the physical, running and jumping and speed work, and then the psychological, social, mental side. There's four pillars. Some volunteers and some paid coaches, as you say, focus too much on one and neglect the others, right? So they might be overly tactical and they're spending, hours explaining things to kids on a whiteboard that are maybe too young for this over explanation and wasting valuable field time talking when the kids really need to focus on building their technical ability, or coaches who focus too much on the physical, right? They're doing laps, they're doing suicide shuttle runs, bag skates in hockey. And it's like these kids can't accept the pass properly and they're running all the time. They're not touching the puck. They're not touching the ball. So it's very hard. Again, the most skillful coaches, volunteer or paid, are ones that cover all four areas and realize that all four are important. And making those connections, having good team chemistry, building the team environment, like, and making kids want to be there, all those psychological things. Some environments are just too, it's almost like you're going like it's to a fitness class. Well, the team sport shouldn't be that. The social side, the mental side matters. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. I'm not here to criticize. I know in my coaching, I've probably, you know, overdone this a little bit and neglected that and had to recorrect over the course of a season. And then you have limited time, depending, what club you're with, what sport you're with, what level. You might see the team or the players twice a week in a game, as a common example. And some of those aspects are being affected by the time they're not with you. What's the message they're getting from their parents, for instance, when you're trying to develop the social mental side of an athlete, and the message at home could be drastically different. You know, it could be, you need to dominate, you need to score, you need to do this, while the coach is preaching teamwork. And imagine a 10-year-old having those two adults in their life, basically authority figures, pulling in different directions.
You talk about that push and pull between coach and parent. And often we see it play out on the pitch or at the hockey rink or at the court, where you literally have a coach who's giving instruction or players who are trying to communicate with their teammates while a parent is shouting instruction from the stand. That can be nipped in the bud if proper protocol is established between a coach and a parent, and there's an understanding among that parent group that this is your child's time. It's not time for you to try to tell them through direction what to be doing out there. I know you can only speak for your club, and I know it's not a perfect system anywhere, but as somebody who oversees those coaches, how do you attempt to give them guidance in that regard, both with the kids that they're going to be coaching and with the parent groups that they're going to have to establish a relationship with?
Yeah, so in our house, we've had the benefit, both Sarah and I, to coach our own kids. Not every household has had the benefit of doing that. So we've had the experience, even though we're paid to administer the sport in our respective clubs. We've had the benefit of having the parent volunteer experience, where we have a child on the team playing with classmates or people we grew up with in the neighborhood. So we have, some people that are paid in the game. They don't have that perspective. We've had the benefit of our kids being coached by us, but also, I never coached Ben in hockey. He always had, coaches from the Burnaby Winter Club, or our daughter, with the provincial program, national team program. We're not coaching her. So we've seen it from multiple angles. And, you know, some of the coaches we passed through with, using Ben's hockey as an example, was the attitude was like, I don't talk to the parents. It was almost like the parents are the enemy. It was, allergic to parents kind of mentality. And there are some people in the soccer world like that too. And my opening, parent meeting all the time was, one of the topics I always said is like, come talk to me. Like, there's 24-hour rule. I don't have a 24-hour rule. If you want to talk after the game, I'll talk to you in the parking lot after the game. Like, there's no topic that's, you know, that life threatening when it comes to youth sports, that really it's going to end poorly. Like, now the parent might be heated about this, that, the other, playing time, position, whatever. I just always felt like, in when I coached my teams, the parents weren't the enemy. Like, I'm not hiding anything. If you want to, there's nothing off the table to talk about. So I was always open. And, when we do our club coaching courses at North Van FC, or coach orientations, we encourage the coaches to have a preseason meeting, introduce yourself, like, tell them your background a little bit. If you're not a soccer guy, tell them that. But maybe you're a teacher, which is a great asset as a coach. You work with kids in a group setting for a job as a professional. We have some coaches, they're physiotherapists. Like, what a great coach to have if your kid has a coach who maybe didn't play soccer, but is a physiotherapist, is going to be teaching your kid about prehab and maybe doing, better warm up routines than the next guy. So we encourage coaches to let the families know about them, be approachable, and even have a mid-season check-in or two, even when things are going well. Because you don't want to have meetings and parent check-ins, you know, only to deal with a major issue, because it's awkward, versus an ongoing, a little bit of a give and take. And, some parents will take advantage and ask more questions, or want more conversation than others. But at the end of the day, again, like, most people, I tend to give, in my job, we have 900 volunteers at NVFC for 250 teams. I go with the view that they're all good people. They're putting in their time. They're not getting paid. They're giving back to their community, and until they they prove me otherwise through action, poor action, they're all good people. So if you're a good person, and these are just conversations with classmates and neighborhood friends, that shouldn't be too tenuous, given we're talking about kids soccer. We're not talking politics, you know.
Yeah, that's a dangerous one these days. Although youth sports can feel like that sometimes, and politics do appear to creep in at times. But I think the point you made, Steve, is a really good one. That it doesn't have to be because something has gone wrong that you address a parent or have that conversation or that outreach. Because when you point out something specific, hey, I just want you to know your daughter is one of the hardest workers we have, and it's a pleasure to coach her. That lets the parent know, I see your child. I see them in a specific way. I'm not just saying good job. I'm just not saying, hey, they're good. I give you something specific. And that goes a long way, I think, with parents. And I think it's a real benefit for coaches to look at things that way. In your position now, and also as you've coached over the years, what are the most common issues that you have seen when it comes to parents coming to coaches or to you in your role now as a technical director? Is it playing time? Is it team selection? Is it sideline behavior? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, playing time's always one, for sure, and that's a double-edged sword. There's coaches that too focused on winning, and we've had to step in, and because the weaker players are maybe getting less time because they want to win. And we're talking like below half a game or getting 10 minutes out of a 60-minute game is just not acceptable. And so when it hits that extreme, we have to have a conversation on that end and fix that, obviously. And then sometimes it's, you know, we allow our coaches some discrepancy, and some players might be getting, 50 minutes out of 60, and some might get 40 out of 60, and that's okay. Like, for players to fight for the few extra minutes that might be handed out, is actually a development tool. Sometimes we have to say to parents, like, it's not going to be exactly equal. Some kids might get an extra shift. If it hits an extreme, yeah, then the coach is probably out of line. But, one of the questions that always kind of makes me laugh is when parents say, what does my kid have to do to get more time? And it's like, well, if I tell you they have to do A, B, and C, like, the other 12 kids are doing that too at the same time. So 3 months from now, we might be in the same spot because everyone got better. For me, again, it's one of those questions where, and I've had to answer that question in my own teams, and I always end it with reassuring the parent, like, your kid's not doing anything wrong, by the way. Like, they're not missing some magic thing they're not doing that I'm going to tell you now. You're going to go home and tell them. Like, if they're not working hard in practice or not behaving, don't worry, I'll fix it, like, right away. I'm not going to let it drag on for 3 months. There's no magic, you know, answer here. What does my kid got to do to get more time? Like, they're all improving at the same time, you know?
Well, you talk about development overall, and you threw out some numbers earlier about how many teams there are and volunteers. There's a lot of kids under your club's umbrella, and you're just one of a number of clubs in a number of sports. Overall, from a philosophical standpoint, what is your goal as a technical director or perhaps as a club in general with everybody you see? What is the general goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think having, a healthy lifestyle and, beyond youth, and staying active. Myself as an example, like, I'm 48, I got to get my knee scoped in January, and I'm probably going to go back and, like an idiot, play, in the local VMSL league somewhere, with guys way younger than me, right? And I just, through my years of Whitecaps and SFU and a little bit with the national team. And there's some years like the change room was just amazing. We had a great group, and we had our ups and downs. There's some years the change room wasn't great. And what I love is, being with a group of guys and going out and, on a day like today, why would I want to go out at like 9 o'clock and train like down the street? But and the flip side, how many nights in a row can you stay home and watch Netflix? Like, 1 or 2 nights a week to do something different, hang out with the guys after for a bit, and you might not play with the guys you played with when you were 15, 16. Like, people move, people go there, but you'll find that new group at 38 years old if you have to, because you share that same upbringing and you share those childhood change room, or maybe you had a special travel tournament. You'll share those memories. You'll have that in common, and you'll relive it with another group, even though you're 38 years old or 45 years old or whatnot.
It's hard for parents, I think, to look that far into the future sometimes because they're so focused on that stage of development and we have such an emotional connection with our children. But I do believe, as you just said, if you can zoom out and think, okay, what do I really want for them when they're 35, when they're 48? Look, if they go on to play at a high level, that's great, but that's going to be driven by the child. But it's a sense of community, it's physical literacy, it's a healthy active lifestyle, which I believe leads to mental well being as well, or at least a component of mental well being. And if that's the goal, as many people as long as possible, I think that's the perspective not only parents should take, I believe that's perspective clubs should take as well. How do you enforce that, I suppose, or oversee that in a club to make sure that that is the guidance that is ongoing with each of your teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's twofold, and they're both very difficult tasks in their own way. So, in one is sort of coach education and sort of developing a culture among our coaches that it has to be fun, and the players have to want to be there and want to come, and that could be your select environments, it could be house, and again, the challenging part, we have 800 volunteers, and we have limited touch points. There's some courses and touch points we have that are mandatory by BC Soccer, and we have a certain curriculum to follow, and then there's other things that are optional, but we're asking volunteers to give more time to attend a orientation, for example. So it is just constantly trying to get that message of making sure the kids enjoy it and want to come back, and develop a good team culture. And that's hard given the numbers we're dealing with. Having said that, you know, culturally, the world is changing. Like the average person is more aware of mental health and well-being of children. And, the coaches you and I might have grown up with in the late 80s, those are less now. There's still dinosaurs around. But I think most people have, you know, with social media and more education and, shows like this, right? More people get it, when they're coaching youth. So it is a hard task, but it's not just up to the clubs. It's us. It's a societal shift that we need to continue to make. And then the other challenging part, and we do try and do this with our more higher level kids, is parent education, because those are the ones where they're in our club and it's like, how does my kid get to the Whitecaps program, and recognize for the provincial team, and trying to explain to them that, number one, it's out of our control, and those environments aren't for everybody, because some people that do make it, they come right back and they're fine. And I think a lot of times they're fine because of the support at home. If you get picked for a very high level program like the national team or the Rise program, we have a personal family friend that was a teammate of my daughter's that was released from the Whitecaps. She thrived coming back. It was no problem. She was a very great teammate when she left. Everyone was happy for her to return. But I've seen boys come back to the club system, and all the parents cared about, you know, was their kid getting recognized for the Whitecaps program. Their player was better than everybody else. It's hard to come back home when that's kind of the aura you give off. And kind of like we touched about early, I think in this segment here, like everyone's going to end up playing beer league soccer in the end. We're all ending up in the same spot. It might be when you're 22 and it might be when you're 48, but my concern with that parent education piece is, you know, trying to get them relaxed, but like where the harm comes is the player starts to attach their self-worth, or are they a good player or not, to whether or not they made that program, right? And for instance, soccer's a great big world. The Whitecaps might not like you, but maybe a really good D1 school in the US really likes how you play, and just because you didn't make the Whitecaps, you might get a good scholarship. Like, it's the same with hockey. Like, like now there's more and more choices. There's the WHL, like now you can go to college. Like, no program defines you, you know, um, because we've seen kids, you know, that go to the next level full of excitement. And you never know how a kid in this level that's identified is going to translate to the next. Like there's highly touted kids once they hit adult, never mind pro, they can't play in the local VMSL, because it's youth sports is totally different than adult sports. So that's one thing we try and warn parents about. There's no program that's, worth attaching like your self-worth to, because if you don't get picked, does that mean you failed? Like, no, you didn't get picked.
And you didn't get picked now. It's a snapshot in time of when these selections are being made. And a couple of episodes ago, we had a great conversation with John O'Sullivan, who's done a lot of work in this area. And he identified, I used the word a couple of times here, but talent selection versus talent identification are two different things. Talent selection is what we do in a moment. These are the players that right now we believe are ready for this level. Talent identification is trying to figure out who's going to be good for a national program or a university program. And that is so difficult because we don't know when people are going to grow. We don't know about the compete that you talked about earlier, or if other interests are going to take over. We have no idea. In fact, humans have proven that we're not great at talent identification at a really young level. And there's a lot of different pathways. If we want to stick on the men's side, for every Alfonso Davies, who people went, okay, early on, this guy's going to be a star, and he's become one. There's a Joel Waterman who goes a completely different way and plays for the local team and then goes CPL and then makes his way up to the MLS and then makes the Canadian national team. There's a bunch of different ways to get to the place you want to end up, and not everyone's going to end up in the same spot. So to bring this back to what we're talking about in youth sports, tiering. It seems to be happening younger and younger, and it's a concern for parents. Talk about how you view tiering and age appropriate tiering.
Again, it's not to me a black and white issue. For some people, I know it's a bad word. And for others, at the other end of the spectrum, it's like, how are we not doing this? So, I saw a program early on when our kids were much younger, and it struck me because you could sign up, and it was a hockey program, and it asked you like to where your kid fit, and they were gonna place the kids in groups based on what you said as a parent. And I was like, that's interesting because, we kind of put medium because Ben had been on the ice a bit, but we knew there was some kids that, were, you know, born with skates on. And then, the program shuffled him up or down after a month. And I actually thought it's actually not a bad idea because I think there are some parents, we think, oh, tiering and every parent wants their kid in the top tier. Well, that's not true. There are some parents out there that are like, my kid started late. He started soccer at U9. Like, is it too late? Well, if there's no tiering, it might be too late because it's kind of hard to jump into an environment where the best players are still mixed in. So it's a tough issue to talk about. We start tiering, I would say, in terms of soccer at NVFC is sort of in the middle ground. We're not the earliest, but a lot of clubs wait till U11. We're kind of at U9. The example I give, that sort of the pro tiering example is, you know, if you have a U9 kid that started soccer a year early, there's U4 programs now, so 3 years old, he could have played for 5 years. And if that kid has an older sibling, he's literally been playing since he was 2 in the backyard, since he could walk with the older sibling, and maybe an athletic family that does, mountain biking and basketball as a second sport and whatnot. And then we have the family, the kids have other attributes. They're really good at piano or music or dance or something, and, want to get involved in sports. And they've just decided that at 8 years old. And for the example A that I gave to go up against the other one is it's borderline unfair. It might actually be borderline unsafe. And I often hear like, oh, in school, they sometimes pair the strongest students with the weakest readers to help, and they both, it's good for both. And I get that, but like at the end of the day, when you're playing soccer, there's opponents. Like the nature of sports is competition, and the definition of competition is opposite of cooperation. So the strong kid isn't worried about the weak kid on the other team. He's thinking, get the ball off that kid as fast as I can and punish the other team with a goal. So equating the classroom where it's pretty much a cooperative environment that the hockey rink, the soccer field isn't. So yeah, I'm pro tiering. However, you know, what I am against is you have some clubs that are really, medium-sized, big clubs. You have 300 kids in the age group, and you select 10 8-year-olds, and you're trying to play them up a year, or all the resources go into that one group of 10, and they're doing travel tournaments, and the parents are paying all kinds of money, and they've hired a paid coach. Like, we have no idea what that group of 10 is going to look like at 12 years old. And now to fix this, some of them have dropped off, or someone's better. We got to go cut one of them or three of them. What does that do? You were anointed as the special one at 8 years old. Think about what it does to the mindset of that group, or think if they're unwilling to make the changes, what it does to the ones left out of the group that should be in. So again, finding the balance, like having some soft tiering where, a bigger group of kids, and in our U9-10 select, even, beyond into the teenage years, the select teams have a volunteer mom and dad, and the house teams do as well. They don't get sort of extra. They're just kind of pulled, like I call it, separating the lions from the lambs, because the rest, the middle ground players, an argument could be said like, okay, well, if you're sort of in the middle and you make the select team, like that's great. You're going to be challenged, but it might not be great because you might be just a passenger on that team, and that might not. And the kid who's left in house is going to, you know, by a slim margin, he's going to be the leader. He's going to get more touches. Everyone's passing him the ball. The kids know that's the go-to guy, like without the coach saying anything, even at 9, 10, 11. So for me, that tight, grab a special, no such thing at that age group at 8, 9, that's sort of the irresponsible tiering in my mind, because, there's so much more of their youth career to go to get to U18, and so much is going to change.
Well, and there's a couple of things that you've talked about that are really important there. So when it comes to responsible tiering, which would be the opposite of what you just described there at the end, to me, it should be fluid. So, all right, here's where you are right now. But if you're at let's just use numbers for an example here, Div 1, Div 2, Div 3. If you're at the top end of Div 2, we're going to give you an opportunity to mix in with the Div 1 team at some point to see if that is an environment that you're going to be ready for soon, or maybe you're ready for now. How do you perform in that environment? And vice versa. We might have some players who haven't adapted well to a higher tier that might need to play down a little, and that environment is a little more conducive to them as well. The other thing you mentioned earlier, I think, is really important in that discussion as well, and it's the identity piece that parents, coaches, everybody involved here with the children needs to make sure that these kids are not attaching their self-worth to that team or that program, as you said earlier. No program defines you. Just because you're a Div 1 player or a Div 3 player now, it doesn't say anything about how it's going to be 5 years from now. It doesn't say anything about you as a person. This is just the level that people have assessed you to be at right now. And that, to me, is what needs to be enforced, not only through coaching, but through parents as well, Steve.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for inserting that one point I missed about responsible tiering, the ongoing, sort of monitoring of an age group, having staff or a volunteer's ability to put names forward, or staff scouting house teams, so that, for the next season, a player can be brought into the select environment for, a period of 4 to 6 weeks, not just, 1 or 2 sessions, and to see, okay, next season, is this player going to be over here or from Div 2 to Div 1? Because again, in terms of finding the late bloomer or the player who progressed due to hard work or doing extra at home, with mom and dad in the backyard, or whatever way they found a way to improve. Maybe they just grew and got bigger and stronger and faster, and now they're it's all coming together for them at a certain age. So that is definitely one of the tenets of responsible tiering, is the ability to, if you don't make select the first year, we actually, this last year, for the first time, Robbie Tice, our technical director, put together just a graphic and a chart of how many players moved up a level from house to Div 2, Div 2 to Div 1, from sort of U9 to U14, those key developing ages still. I don't know the overall number, but he basically charted it out, and it was sent to all the whole club. All the parents got it was a little blurb with the chart, but basically saying that, the myth of, if you don't make select the first year, you never make it. It's just not a thing at our club anyway.
Well, and I think there's another piece to this as well, and it's the one that I talked about with that identity part of children really understanding. And I think that is put on them by adults somewhere along the line. Because if you just let the kids go, they don't act that way. I see it at the schoolyard. I see it when you talk about those environments where you were playing up with kids 3 years older. I say kids, you were teenagers at the time, or a couple years down. If you just put them out there to play, they'll figure it out and they'll do that. And at the end of the day, they just want to have fun. They just want to play with their friends, and they just want to, whether it's compete or improve their skill level, they just want to play a game. We as parents are the ones who have a lifetime of experience that should tell us, do not put that on the children. Do not put that identity and pressure on them, because if you don't, they're just fine. Thank you very much.
No, for sure. You play any game, you play a board game with a kid, they're competitive. They want to win, and we don't need to stress them out with the results of games at these very, very young ages. Of course, there's life lessons to be taught through sport, and I'm not all hugs and rainbows type of coach or technical director. For instance, if you're coaching a team, you can't be mad if they lose a game. Like, what if the other team's just better? Like, it's not in your control. But if your team is, a bunch of teenagers, you got a 15-year-old group, and they don't work hard at a game, they show up late, their warm-ups poor, and you lose 3-2 to a team you beat 4-0 earlier in the season. Not mad because you lost 3-2. I'm mad because, the effort was poor, you weren't prepared, and you didn't work hard, you didn't compete. I think you can control your compete level to some extent. You can control your preparation, obviously. And I, recall, the times that Sarah and I aren't perfect parents, and we've had our moments, but I never got in the car with Ben and said, you only got 1 assist today. Like, you could have had a 4-point night. Like, but if I didn't see the compete level that he normally could hit, then it was going to be a conversation. And I even have to say, sometimes probably didn't even handle those conversations the best as a parent, reflecting back. But what I can say is, I think the only times I, really was a bad parent, quote unquote, it was due to the compete level and the effort, and maybe being too demanding, because again, they're just kids. Even that can't be 100% consistent. The pros aren't consistent with it. Everyone has an off day. Everyone's going to miss and shank shots and whatnot. And we tried to parent, and I tried to coach my teams based on not the outcome, but sort of their intention and how they went about things more than outcomes.
Well, none of us are perfect parents, and we learn through trial and error, and we learn through education like what we're trying to provide through programs like this. And usually it comes from a good place. It's just the manner in which it's done. Hey, that conversation is going to happen. Probably shouldn't happen in the car on the way home from the game. It can happen a little bit later when everybody is relaxed from the situation and in a more calm manner. What was the approach that your parents took with you? How were your parents as far as what they introduced you to as a child and the way that they handled sports with you?
My parents weren't, they didn't play high level sports at all. So, like they played, BC Tel slow pitch, if you remember BC Tel. And, I jump into their games when I became a teenager sometimes. Yeah, they weren't, my mom and dad coached when we were both me and my brother when we were little up until, I don't know, we were 12 or something. But my dad never played soccer. He was more of a hockey fan, never really played high level sports. So we didn't I don't think I got a lot from them other than support, driving me around, signing me up. I always wanted to play hockey. They never put me in hockey because, it was too expensive and soccer was the easy, accessible program. And I was kind of smallish as a kid. I think they were worried I was going to get hurt. So that's how I got into soccer. A lot of playing in the backyard because back then there was no extra academies and stuff when you were 8, 9, 10. Like now, we used to play soccer in the schoolyard, Lord Nelson and East Van on the gravel, like every lunch hour, every recess. So it was, even though it was playing club soccer, I was playing 7 days a week. You don't see as much of that anymore on the school grounds. It still happens, but not as much. We'd go out in the mud in the rain. You didn't care about the weather back then for playing at recess or lunch. But I think where again, I had maybe a moment, or there was a time when things changed for me, is when I did get invited to the National Training Center, and it was a very intimidating environment at 14. But the guys I mentioned earlier, Bruce Twomley, Chris Bennett, they kind of took my game to the next level. And being in that environment, it was like, you're in the lion's den as a pretty young kid, and they just fostered that competitiveness, and it was literally fight for every inch of the field. So I give a lot of credit to them. I think about the years I was there. I was, 14, 15, 16, like pretty formative years, and they were almost like father figures to me, not just coaches. So um, I think a lot of my success post youth, it would be due to those two guys.
Well, I do want to come back to your upbringing and I want to talk about what you did with your kids as well. But you mentioned a really critical point there. And we're in a place now where we have academies. We have far more club sports than we ever had when you and I were growing up. And you mentioned the expense of hockey was something that prevented you from playing when you were a child. Every sport has gotten more expensive, not just because of inflation, it's outpaced inflation with youth sports. Are we in a better place with youth sports now? Or should some of this current environment, from an access standpoint and from a free play standpoint, which you just mentioned, be dialed back?
It's tough because every sport's become year round. Like soccer's not. I'm not going to pretend our clubs, taking some sort of stance. We're year round because if we don't offer an in-house, like a product, summer camps or spring academy, if we don't offer the extras in the off seasons or the downtimes, the parents who want it, they will go get it somewhere else. And us as a nonprofit, one of our goals is to keep the sport as cheap as possible because it's not just, it's more expensive, but then there's more extras in season, which makes it more expensive. And then the season is year round. So there's like a triple whammy in terms of expense. It's not the price has gone up. There's more to sign up for. Oh, and you can play in the off season. That's a triple whammy in terms of, and that's, you've seen the rise in spring hockey, and then you could be on the ice all summer if you want, so every sport's year round. Baseball, this fall ball, and as soon as the weather turns, everyone's at batting cages and pitching coaches and playing through December, January, even though there's no baseball. So there's no sport that hasn't gone down that path. I don't know if we're better off or I don't or worse off, but it comes down to every family like making their own decisions. Like you're in charge of what happens in your house with your kid. And there's no right path. There's no perfect way to do it. Like, you know, I look at a kid like Connor Bedard and he's from North Van. He did play for North Shore Winter Club and he probably did a lot of extra hockey, but he played soccer at NVFC till like U14 at a select level. Missed a lot of soccer, I'll tell you that, because hockey was, always the number one. And the family was honest with that. They weren't, pretending not to be. That's a decision they made. But, Ben had teammates that the second sport was gone at like 9 years old, right? And so it's challenging for parents to maintain both. You know, we with Ben, we didn't do a lot of extra hockey. Like he's still not been on a skating treadmill, you know? Like he just never did power skating and he went full-time hockey when he made the Calgary Hitmen in the WHL. It's when he was really, couldn't play soccer anymore. Now, he missed a lot of soccer as well because the hockey coaches don't really take to missing something. Another topic. But there's great stories of multi-sport kids that thrive in one and eventually drop off the other. But, then you hear like, I heard a story about Patrick Kane and he was, one sport athlete, very young, played on 7 spring teams and was running around playing multi games a weekend. And he turned out just fine in terms of his hockey career. So every family's different. Like you said earlier, every pathway's different. You got to gauge how much your kid wants, like, do they want more? Sometimes I think parents see their buddies sign up for stuff and they just sign their kid. Hey, I signed you up for this. The kid's like, all right. And they're 10. They're just going to get in the car and go. They don't have a voice in it. So trying to gauge that. But yeah, it's tough. Like one thing we always did in the summer, like Ben was not on the ice, wasn't allowed. Even Christmas break, we tried to shut it down for at least a couple weeks. And Sarah always had this saying like, I want my kid to miss the sport. Like if you never miss it, you know, that's a problem. Well, how are you going to miss a sport if you're training 11 to 12 months a year round? You never miss it. And so, part of growing a love for the game, I think, is actually, or learning if you love it, is do you miss it when it's not there? Right. And some kids never get to experience that. I actually think there's some kids out there, they look forward to going to school on September 3rd after the long weekend because the first day back of school, I'm going to see all my buddies and they miss school. But if kids went to school through July and August, I don't think they'd be missing school on September 3rd. Like they'd just be like, oh, this treadmill of nonstop school, So I don't know. That's just my own personal perspective on it.
Well, you mentioned Connor Bedard and your son Ben, who plays for the Pittsburgh Penguins now, second youngest player in the National Hockey League after going 11th overall to the Penguins in the last draft. You also had Macklin Celebrini under your umbrella. So you guys have turned out some great hockey players from your soccer program, even though they didn't
Yeah.
continue. And as you said, hey, Patrick Kane, his pathway was a little bit different. Would you say your philosophy in general, though, Steve, and your advice to parents in general, and yes, every situation's a little bit different, but in general, is it a multi-sport approach for as long as is feasible for the kids and for the family?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of it and it could be like one of the sports you're just playing house, so there's some social benefits to it, like having a different friend group, like your soccer friend group versus your hockey friend group. Then you have your school friend group. Like you're going to lose touch with your friends over time. But if you have multiple, like chances are you're going to maintain some of those friendships into your adult years. The cross training benefit, using different muscles, and not putting the strain on the same muscles year round, waking up some different muscles. Like a sport like tennis, where pretty much all the movements, side to side versus, maybe hockey, there's obviously lateral movement, but tennis is purely side to side, or developing different engines, aerobic versus anaerobic. So there's physical, tactical, like if you look at, I don't want to take credit for Macklin or Connor's hockey career because they were at my club, but I watch how they play and I see some soccer sense and decisions they make with the puck. And not everything's north south. And, you know, Macklin's not out there pushing a puck by a guy, bulldozing him and getting it on the other. Like he's outsmarting people out there. And the same with Connor. So and I think, that comes from, when you look at soccer, there is a lot of east-west to the game when it's time to keep possession. When you play 11-a-side soccer, there's 21 other human beings that you have to interact with in terms of opponents and teammates. Well, hockey's a much more simplified version of that. There's way less things to compute on the ice. Yeah, again, don't want to take credit for their hockey careers, but when I watch the highlights or some of their games, I see some flashes of soccer. I'm sure Rick would probably agree with me. Obviously him being a high level soccer player himself.
Yeah, he does, and he was in episode 3, and he certainly said that he believes that the multi-sport approach, and certainly soccer in particular, has contributed to Macklin's success and his on-ice vision. The one of the 3 you didn't mention there is your own son, and you can take some credit there, certainly from a genetic standpoint, if nothing else. Your son played soccer until 15 years old and a fairly high level of soccer. Do you believe that his hockey IQ, which scouts and his professional team and his teammates rave about, do you believe that is directly attributable to the fact that he played multiple sports and in particular soccer?
Yeah, I mean, again, back to what you asked at the start about, is it something you're born with or can it be developed? And it's probably a bit of both. But yeah, I do think him having played soccer, and it's a different game. You know, there's no boards to keep the ball in. Like in hockey, if you misfire a pass, it sometimes works out into your favor because it ends up in the other team's corner and the other winger's banging the defenseman and you're getting a goal scoring chance. Where in soccer, that that ball's going off the end line and the other team, especially at the highest level, they might have the ball for the next 4 minutes and you're not going to see it back for a while. So soccer's very tactical, and there's obviously tactics in hockey, but hockey has different qualities and attributes. There's brute force and intimidation and the physicality of it. It's obviously a thing in hockey compared to soccer. But yeah, soccer's 360. You don't pass the puck back to the goalie often in hockey, right? So yeah, I could go on all day about it, and Ben's old hockey coaches will hate me if they hear this, but yeah, that's kind of my feeling on it.
Yeah, you only pass it back if you got Marty Bedard in net and you need him to score a goal for you on an empty net and you want to pick up an apple on that particular play. And I should emphasize here, we're not just talking about 2 sports. You could have your children play basketball, baseball. There are so many different athletes at high levels who have talked about the contribution that multi-sport has brought to their game. The hockey pathway is an interesting one because it is much different than other sports. And there are different avenues now, certainly with the prominence of college programs compared to what they used to be relative to major junior hockey. Ben went the major junior hockey route. He got drafted by the Calgary Hitmen, and that meant leaving home at 16. At least that was the decision your family arrived at. I can't imagine that's an easy one. I think about my own kids. I think about parents who are watching or listening to this, thinking about their kid leaving home when he or she is 16 years old to go pursue what is their athletic dream. How did your family arrive at that decision and determine it was the best path for him?
Back when we had to make that decision, like the big topic was, foregoing the the WHL route to stay eligible for NCAA 2 years down the road and play in the BC Junior Hockey League. And, I think it's a good thing now that kids don't have to make that choice they can go to the WHL and still stay eligible. I think it's fantastic that you can decide if you want to go to college, when you're 18, you don't have to make that choice at 16, which was hard. So at the end of the day, we consulted with other families that had players go through the WHL and BC Junior Hockey League, families that had kids older than us. The Calgary Hitman, Gary Davidson, the GM at the time, he's still the GM now. He had a lot of experience drafting players. He'd worked in the WHL, a very successful WHL GM, and he's an older gentleman, kind of like a father figure, giving advice. Very low pressure, but very informative, and we have a lot to be thankful to him. And then Ben's advisor at the time, Ross Gurney, who had many NHL clients. So just trying to marry all that. But for me, the final decision came down to, you know, there was very few players opting out of going to the major junior and staying in the BC Junior Hockey League. 90% were taking their WHL spot, and it was the higher level of play. And we're talking about longer term development, longer runway. If you go to college, you have more time to make the NHL. And my thought was your most important year of development. What year is your most important year? And people say, well, when you're 8, when you're 16, or the answer is the most important year is this year, like right now. And to put off going to the WHL, playing in the highest level you could for 2 years to then maybe go to college at 18, it just didn't make sense. And so ultimately, Sarah and I said, like, if WHL doesn't work out, Canadian schooling isn't expensive. Ben can come home, live in the basement and go to SFU or Cap College or whatnot and still get a degree, just not playing NCAA hockey. So, because there's no guarantees when you go to the WHL. And in terms of moving out of home, it was like he wanted to do it. I think he was ready for it emotionally, socially. But at the same time, it's like anything, it's like a summer camp program. If your kid comes home on Tuesday after 2 days of camp, he hates it. Don't take him back on Wednesday. And at the end of the day, if he went to the WHL and he hated the experience, and comes home at Christmas and doesn't want to go back for the second half of the year, okay, stay home. you know, like we'll finish your schooling here and play wherever. Maybe you play, youth sports hockey or something, right? So charting out this path, years in advance and losing sight of like sports is day to day. Like if you at any level, like house league soccer, you have to enjoy it and want to go back. I don't know an NHL coach just plotting out the next 5 years because there is no 5 years from now for those. It's day to day, right? The sport's so fluid with performance and health, being injury free, and that trying to plot things out years in advance is. Yeah, I have parents asking me, their kids are 10. How do we get in the Whitecaps residency program when we're 14? I'm like, just focus on your 10-year-old soccer season right now. Like, you know, we'll have an information meeting when your kid's 13, like the year before, but not 4 years before.
What you said during the course of that answer that really stands out to me, and I was very curious about how the family came to that decision. That's what Ben wanted to do. And so you support that decision. You talk through it because as a parent, you got to protect your child from whatever might be out there and make sure they're in a safe environment. But ultimately, he wanted to do that. Your daughter has chosen soccer. I would love to know from a parental standpoint, from two professional soccer players before, what the conversations were like in terms of trying not to put that pressure on your own children. Hey, we all want our kids to fall in love with something, and it's pretty cool if it's something that you know well, but ultimately it should be their decision. How did you and Sarah foster a love of the game and allow your children to find their own paths?
Yeah, I mean, again, just letting them choose and with Lacey is such a different story. Like Ben with soccer, playing in his neighborhood with all Coquitlam kids. We had, great parent groups and he still keeps in touch with his soccer teammates when he's in town. So I love that. And so it was very easy for him to stay in soccer longer. It was fun. The whole team knew it was the second sport and supportive of that. There was no parents that were upset that Ben was missing games or where's his commitment. And I'm grateful having met and still friends with some of those families. With Lacey, she didn't take to the ice well like Ben did. Like you probably have had a sore back after bringing your kids on the ice for the first time. And I went through that with Ben and it was painful, but he loved the ice. And I went through it with Lacey and it was just like, I can't do this again. I'm 2 years older now. And she just didn't take to it. And so she knows how to skate, but just to get by to go to public skate. And so we had her in gymnastics as her second sport. She loved gymnastics. And at some point, I can't remember when, but it was early, like 9 years old, and it was getting boring and she didn't want to go anymore. Like, and we're like, okay, and one more phase. And then she like didn't want to go. And it was one of those, as a parent, if they don't want to do it. And, we tried every trick in the book. Look at your brother. He does two things. We want you to do two things. So we signed her up for Taekwondo. Like that lasted 6 months. Didn't want to go. Too boring. But she just loves soccer. And maybe it was I think it's the team aspect. I just think the other, like gymnastics and Taekwondo, is a little more individual. And we desperately wanted to sort of push her into doing two sports longer. We made suggestions, and it was, "No, I don't wanna play basketball." No. And she played school sports. She did basketball in school and found other ways, and we'd play hockey in the basement, water skiing in the summer, snow skiing in the winter. So she got the multi-sport in a non-structured way, in our household. But, yeah, she was a little more just, you know, the other sport fell by the wayside a little earlier than I would have liked. But what are you gonna do? Force her to go to gymnastics like we just talked about? You know, you can't do it that way, right?
No, you can't. And I'm really glad you brought up school sports because it's a really different environment there from when you and I grew up. That was a real access point, and now it's changed because of what you mentioned earlier, 12 months a year with a lot of sports. Oftentimes, when you get to the high school level, those school sports teams are only filled with kids who play club sports, and it erodes one pathway for kids who are looking for a recreational pathway or at least an easy access point from a cost perspective and an access perspective of driving, that sort of thing. Do you worry at all about that aspect of the environment, Steve? That with the rise of club sport and year-round sport and further specialization, that we lose this ability for kids who don't have the chance to do those, whether it's because of expense or time commitments or what have you, that they don't have this access point to recreation that they once did?
Yeah, I mean, in our circles of people running clubs or talking to parents and whatnot, it's a sensitive topic, the school sports. And, I'm kinda torn. I don't wanna hit the middle ground. I've often said if you're playing the highest level of club soccer, you shouldn't be able to play school sports. And I've had my head ripped off. And then I listen and, like, oh, there's why should, if a good player is playing, at a high level in the club, why should they not get the social aspects of playing for their school, representing their school? I've had a teacher, coach slash teacher, explain to me like when kids go to college, they're representing their school colors and they're playing soccer on a scholarship and going to school. But you're saying in high school that's not appropriate. And it's like, well, maybe it should be for kids, like you mentioned, that might not be able to access club soccer. And, I'm generalizing in my stance and I'm like, well, the higher level kids, they just want to play school soccer to show off in front of their friends. Well, is that something we want to encourage? Like, because there is a bit of a range in ability on the school soccer teams. You have sometimes house players with, Div 1 players or whatnot. So, and then there's the season. Like we have some of our high level teams, in grade 11 and 12, those athletes are making the school soccer team. And the boys season for school soccer just ended. It was right. Some of the school coaches, they're training multiple times a week. Their club team's not off. And then they got a game and they're playing 2 games a week plus training. Then they got their team game on the weekend and they're doing this at grade 11 and 12. Like at 12 years old, doing 9 sessions a week, although I don't recommend it, they're made of rubber, right? But at grade 11 and 12, and the club's not talking to the school coach doesn't care. They just want to win their school thing. And we see so many injuries in our sort of U18, U17 higher level teams because those kids got 2 overlapping seasons for a month or so. So I don't know. I think there's a place for school sports for the reasons you mentioned, and for kids who can't play, club sports. For an elite soccer player to go play on the volleyball team or the basketball team, that's maybe their only way to get into a multi-sport situation. I've thought in the past of like you shouldn't be able to play for a high, but then I can be talked out of that too for reasons I mentioned. So I almost, I know, I'm waffling, and for people who know me, I'm pretty opinionated, so it's odd for me not to give one.
It's because there's no easy answer. There really isn't an easy answer because for every pro of the current environment, there's a con. And we have to try to figure out, as the adults in the room, how to balance those out. And the part that breaks my heart, I'm such a big believer in what Jumpstart does in this country because they provide access for families and for children that would otherwise not have access, whether it's through programs or through funding, through transport in some cases. But it breaks my heart when I see the state of play study that they put out. And I see that the kids who say I don't play sports often, the two reasons that are at the top of the list are number one, cost. The programs are too much money for their families to afford. And the next is the top three, actually, it's the third answer that is given is I'm not very good. And I wholeheartedly know that's not true because I've seen Ironmans where people who come across the line just before 17 hours are cheered more than the professionals who win the race. Everyone is good enough to participate in sport, but we've created this belief through the environment that kids aren't good enough all of a sudden when they turn 13 or it's too expensive. And there is this middle ground that I see eroding, and that's what worries me. I don't know if that's the issue for you or if there's another one, but across sport, we've talked about a number of different issues. What do you currently see as the biggest issue in youth sports today?
I think the biggest issue or challenge, or it's a couple words come to mind, like social media, electronics, video games, things like that. I think the proliferation of all of that over the years has really consumed a lot of the free time and the downtime for kids, and it's just a lot more comfortable to you know play FIFA than go out on a day like today and play street soccer, right? And so you get a headset on and you're playing your buddy who's not even at your house, and you're playing FIFA, or and I do think the costs a barrier, and time, like parents, families that both parents work, or three jobs between two parents, and the time to drive around to everything, which is another form of resource basically, then creeps in, the video games and social media, and, having a phone, and interacting on your phone in your room versus being out and playing street hockey. And, you and I are going to sound like dinosaurs, but we have the stories of, you know, I just remember playing street hockey till you couldn't see anymore, and then you went in, and I remember having dinner with my goalie pads on because, like, I ran in for 7 minutes and then right back out and didn't even take my stuff off to play street hockey. Like, soccer in the backyard. My brother played pretty high level soccer as well. He was goalie, like the hours just shooting on him, you know, relentlessly, right? That's a big challenge. Is it's easy, it's comfortable, and it's not putting kids out of their comfort zone. And I think if parents can see, like, your child being put out of their comfort zone because you're going to, practice once or twice a week and on a poor night, or being challenged physically, it's not easy to, hustle up and down a rink and be out of breath, but it's easy to sit on your couch and play video games, right? So, does that is that education? Is it making things more accessible? It's probably a lot of things combined, because accessibility, the time and the money is a problem, but some parents not seeing the benefit of it, because you don't have to play 7 days a week and sign up for everything. You can pick and choose how much. But like, we literally have some kids doing zero, like in terms of, athletics, and even in school, like, right? More kids are on their phone on recess and lunch. And again, dinosaur at lunchtime. We weren't on our phone in 1989. We were out in the schoolyard playing on a gravel field. We're playing soccer. So it's kind of a bit of like an avalanche that's kind of hard to push back uphill here.
Yeah, it is. And again, we sound like dinosaurs, and I am certainly one who is a proponent of what we're seeing, which is so many more schools move to phone free, and you can't have them at the school. And I hope that that continues to proliferate because we're seeing the harm. And you mentioned social media there. I think that's another contributing factor to the one factor I mentioned earlier, which was, oh, I don't think I'm good enough. You went out and you played street hockey and you were a young Patrick Waugh, I'm sure, when you had your goalie pads on, and you didn't realize that compared to somebody who was a high level goalie that you weren't that good. You were the best kid on your block, or you could hang with the kids on your block. You didn't have this constant comparison that I think really hurts kids when that's what they see constantly. Highlight reel, highlight reel, highlight reel. They don't see the work behind all of those things. They don't see all the times that another child or peer failed. They see this one thing and they think that is the truth. Steve, you brought up two children during the social media era. My kids aren't old enough quite yet to have phones, but I'm not that far off. I think there's a lot of parents that are in this gray area right now and they're not sure what they're going to do. How did you and Sarah deal with that with your own children from a phone and social media standpoint?
Yeah, well, the phones we tried to hold off as long as we could, and I think both our kids were the last ones to have phones in their class because we just pushed it off. A funny story about Ben, he he never had social media, and after he was drafted by the Penguins, someone started a fake account and was pretending to be him on Instagram, had all these followers, and we got all the Pens and they helped shut it down. And then it happened again a month later, like in August. And then they shut it down again. And basically the Penguin says, you have to start an Instagram because it's easier for them to shut down the fakes if you actually have one. So now he has one at 18 years old, right? So probably the last 18-year-old in BC to have it. So we kind of tried to push off having video games. Eventually we caved. Yes, we had Xbox. We're not perfect parents, but one thing we always had around our house, there was always the balls or mini sticks or something around. We had a guest bedroom and there was no furniture in it, just two mini hockey nets. It was carpeted, so you could be on your knees playing mini hockey or 2v2 soccer, me and Sarah and the kids, or 1v1, or a tennis ball in the hallway using the doors as goals while, you could, the 5 minutes here and the 7 minutes there, they all add up. And so it's like, just setting the table, like, the backyard always had net in it. And, setting the table, if there's balls around and mini sticks around, maybe they'll pick those up instead of a video game. Cause I think now parents think like, you have to sign up to improve your skills. If you're a soccer player, you have your team environment that's already structured 3 times a week. And then you're signing up for this academy, or me and my buddy are going to go to a personal trainer and work on skills and dribble through cones. It's like, you're better off being in the backyard playing 1v1 with your kid. Even if you're shit at soccer, just stand in net. Like if you're good at getting hit by a ball, then stand in net and play goalie for your kid. And again, the amount of shots and touches without instruction will go a lot farther. And again, the old days, I took a ball and I went 3 blocks down the road to the elementary school and hit the ball against the wall. That doesn't really happen anymore. But I think just even in your own house, encouraging free play, whether it's that sport or a different sport, having a basketball hoop or something, like whatever, so that those hours add up, even though you're not paying for them. Sometimes, depending on group sizes at some of these academies, the hours might go farther because, touches on the puck, touches on the ball, what have you.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know we could do this for a few hours, but you've got some kids to oversee, as we talked about with the numbers earlier, Steve. I really appreciate your insight, not only as a former professional athlete and as a parent, but as somebody who continues to work in youth sports to this day. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks for having me on. And good luck with, I think this is an amazing project. So good luck with your future episodes.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.